But tell me a little bit about the Young Voices Fellowship, the populism work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, so I'm a part of Young Voices Free Society Fellowship, where 5 of us are focusing on different articles on populism, left-wing populism, right-wing populism. We kind of have free reign to write about whatever we want. So, like you mentioned, I'm focused on Hungary right now. I'm looking at a piece on Venezuela and a couple others.
Yeah, there's elements of populism in almost all politics, because the whole process of politics is to get people on your side, or at least pretend that you're on their side. But tell me a little bit about Hungary. The conventional wisdom in the U.S. is that there's a rise in white nationalism, neo-fascism, whatever you want to call it, and Hungary is kind of ground zero in that world.
Yeah, so what's happening in Hungary is Viktor Orban was elected prime minister in 2010, and he just won in 2018 his 3rd consecutive term. He also served in the 90s. And what I think happened is from 2002 to 2010, the Socialist Party were in charge of Hungarian politics. He was elected into office as sort of this kind of liberal against communism, against socialism, and now has kind of gone all the way to the right. He started taking over the media. He owns something like 90% of all media outlets. And he's really focused on kind of being this anti-George Soros, anti-immigration figure that is kind of bred out of the elections kind of across the globe.
Now, liberal in the Hungarian context is not exactly the same as our liberal, right? Explain the difference.
So he was more of a classical liberal, kind of the European definition. So into property rights, freedom, individualism, sort of the things that libertarians today are focused on.
So I see the same dynamic in Poland, and there was what I would call a classical liberal movement, what people sort of left of center call liberal democracy, but the rule of law and institutions that sort of limit sort of the populist tendencies of both the left and the right. Mm-hmm. And everyone's moved away from that. And is it a sort of counter-revolution against overreaching socialism?
I think so, and I think it also has to do a bit with the EU, especially in Hungary. Orban has embraced this illiberal democracy as a term, so he's not even really trying to convince people otherwise. I think the EU is often touting liberalism, and his way of getting back at them is saying, let's be this illiberal democracy.
You know, it's so complicated because I feel, and you look at Brexit, and I feel like this overreaction to the overweening nature of the European Union. They wanted to dictate everything, including, how your toaster worked. And so is somewhere in the middle is this common ground where you could have common markets and free trade and people crossing borders from Poland into Germany, mm-hmm. For instance, versus this very authoritarian European Union. But I feel like the counter-revolution in places like Hungary are just as bad, if not worse.
Yeah, I think it's sort of misguided. I think they should be concerned about the economy. They should be concerned about being able to dictate their own policies at home, but I think they're sort of focused on the wrong issues. With the media takeover that Orban did, he's really putting out these things that are saying this illegal immigration is dangerous and they're terrorists and all these things that are overblown. So it's really just convincing people that there's a problem that probably isn't as big as he says.
So Donald Trump's argument in the closing days of the 2018 election was, I'm a nationalist, mm-hmm. and you should say it too. But I think his nationalism seems to be different than, say, Steve Bannon, who's been over there touting Orban and the Hungarian blood and soil kind of nationalism. Do you think there's a difference?
I do. I think that it's a little bit overblown. I heard some people asking if nationalism meant white nationalism in the media, and I think that they're kind of conflating the two. I think he's sort of putting this America First policy as nationalism, but it's not nearly as bad as what's going on in places like Hungary and Poland.
So you're a classical liberal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we don't I'm a classical liberal too, and we don't like right-wing nationalism, and we don't like Hugo Chavez's version of sort of democratic socialist nationalism. Where is the classical liberal position on all of this stuff?
I think it's sort of a focus on the economy and individual freedom. What both were trying to get out, both the left-wing and right-wing versions of this populism, is that there's some sort of issue and there's government intervention is needed to solve it. And I think the classical liberal idea is that, no, it's not the government's part to solve it, it's actually them getting out of the way and letting people live their lives.
Hugo Chavez.